Hi students, this is your instructor speaking. We continue to go over our Biology 2 online course. Uh, this lecture will be about evolution of invertebrates. But first, let us think and define invertebrates, and but even before that, define animals, because invertebrates and vertebrates are two kinds of animals. What are animals generally? Animals form a kingdom. In Latin, kingdom animalia, animals. The kingdom is a taxonomical unit or a special group that is used in classification of living organisms. You know the concept of domain, right? If you recall, there are domains of uh, bacteria, archaea, and eukarya, and the domain eukarya is huge, and it is subdivided into several kingdoms. So kingdom is smaller than a domain, and animalia, or animals, is a kingdom within the domain eukarya. So some common properties of animals. Animals cannot make their own food, right? So we say in biology there's a term heterotrophs. So unlike plants, which are autotrophs, are able to make their own food, animals must receive nutrients. So they depend on other living organisms. They can eat consumers or autotrophs, plants. Sorry, they can eat producers, right? Plants are producers of food, so animals are consumers. They can eat producers, or they can eat other consumers, other animals. So in both cases, they depend on other living organisms. Then animals digest their food. Uh, if you recall, plants do not really digest. They make glucose in dark reactions following the photosynthesis, gaining enough energy for this making of glucose from the sun. And then they polymerize this glucose into starch, right? And the starch serves as a reservoir for glucose, which is the primary nutrient, or it is stored, for example, in the root, in the shoot system of plants. Uh, Fungi are also not doing the digestion as we know it. They sort of digest food which is outside of them. Recall that they have these hypha, long threads that secrete digestive substances, and these substances decompose food, decompose, for example, dead bodies that are around them, and the released nutrients are sucked into the fungus. Animals are different. They have to internalize a source of food. For example, they can swallow grass, or they can swallow smaller animals, like big fish swallows smaller fish, etc. Then they digest their food inside their organisms, and higher orders of animals developed a special digestive system for that. Right? And when they digest food, then what they actually do when digesting their food, they digest proteins, fats, and carbohydrates into smaller, break them down into smaller molecules. They cannot use whole protein, whole fat, whole carbohydrate. Those must be first digested. Then many animals move from place to place. By moving around, they can find food, escape their enemies, and find a better place to live and find mates. There's an exception. You will learn in just a second that the most primitive animals, sponges, porifera, do not move. But then, as evolution proceeded, higher orders of animals developed special contractile cells, which then formed a muscular tissue. So contracting cells and then contracting muscles allowed animals to move around with all these advantages listed here. Kinds of animals. In this lecture, we will discuss animals that have no backbone or spine. They're called invertebrates, invertebrate animals. Now, they form a lot of smaller groups, well, not really a lot, but several smaller classification groups called phyla, singular phylum. These phyla are shown in the third row below, and you can see that they have names: porifera sponges, cnidarians, silent C, C is not pronounced, animals like jellyfish, then platyhelminths, flatworms, nematoda roundworms, annelids, segmented worms, mollusks, arthropods, and echinoderms, animals like starfish. What is common between all these phyla? They are all animals, so they all are heterotrophs, they all digest their food, they all have, well, except most primitive of them, but most of them have tissues, and they, again, except most primitive of them, they can move around. And in addition, they do not have this backbone or spine. And this is a dramatic difference between one phylum, which is called Chordata, and that Chordata phylum is represented by vertebrates, and we will discuss vertebrates in the next lecture. Now, since we're talking about evolution of invertebrates, let's take a glance at what is thought to be ancestral animals, first animals. Your textbook has a picture of a hypothetic precursor of all animals, which is a colony of protists, which is able to anchor on a solid support and perhaps move. Now, the paleontology, the analysis of fossil record, does not really have evidence for existence of this ancestral colony of protists, but there are fossils of animals that lived like 600 million years ago, and they are thought to be first animals. There are already two groups of them. One resembles today's cnidarians, jellyfish, the pictures to the left, and the other somewhat resembles modern either sponges or mollusks. Sponges unmovable, and mollusks, first mollusks, presumably movable. This nice creature to the right is an artist's rendering of a fossil found in depositions which, by radiometric dating, show the age of 600 million years. As you might have heard that the evolution did not proceed step by step, really. It proceeded in bursts or explosions. One of them was the so-called Cambrian explosion, which happened about 540 years ago, if I'm not mistaken, and it is the time when many different phyla of what we now call animals appeared. Uh, and as you will see, these phyla evolved further, developing certain features which gave them advantage in evolution, and so they were preserved, and we see manifestations of these evolutionary adaptations even now. Okay. Now, what are these evolutionary adaptations? Animals have developed tissues. What is a tissue? You have heard, you are familiar with the term tissue as related to plants, right? Recall three tissues that plants have: the dermal, the ground, and the vascular tissue. Animals have the epithelial, connective, muscular, and nervous tissues. They are groups of similar cells, similar by structure and function, working together to perform a certain function. For example, the nerve tissue consists of special nerve cells or neurons which are responsible for sensing changes in the environment and uh, sending commands to other systems and organs to react to these changes in the environment. Muscular tissue is a group of muscular cells which are all contractile. They can contract, causing movement. Okay, now animals evolved from asymmetric forms, uh, just a mass of cells, a mass of tissues, to symmetrical forms. They developed symmetry. The first kind of symmetry probably was radial symmetry. Uh, it means that the overall shape of an animal is kind of like a circle, and there's a center in this circle, and you can point radiuses to different uh, uh, spots on the circumference, and the if you analyze the part of the animal which is between these two radiuses, between each two radiuses, it is similar to a part between other two radiuses. And so that's radial symmetry. And then bilateral symmetry. Bilateral symmetry means that whatever the overall shape of the animal is, you can see the right side and the left side. Right? For example, mollusks can be very different shapes, sometimes pretty eerie shapes. But if you look at a mollusk's head, it has two eyes, right eye and left eye. And if you draw a line between these eyes to the end of the body will be symmetrical. The right part of it will be symmetrical to the left part of it. Then most animals have developed a body cavity, an interesting adaptation. Plants do not have body cavities. Fungi do not have body cavities, but animals have body cavities, empty spaces, basically. But they're not really empty because they house internal organs, right? There is a chest cavity that houses the heart and the lungs. There's an abdominal cavity that houses the stomach and the intestine. There's a pelvic cavity that houses sexual organs, ovaries and uterus in females, and seminiferous ducts, etc., in males. So body cavities, interesting adaptation, conferred a lot of advantage. Now let's take a look at these listed above phyla of invertebrate animals first. From the simplest to the most complex. The simplest phylum is phylum Porifera, or sponges. You know, sponges that are used for bathing? Are they animals? Yes, they're actually the sponge that you use for rubbing your body during bathing or manicure, pedicure, that's an animal. It's a dead animal, actually, right? They are the simplest invertebrates. They do not have tissues and they do not move, right? So in this regard, they are different from more complicated other phyla of animals. But they are animals as much as they uh, depend on other organisms. They cannot make their own food. They digest their food, right? And they have somewhat uh, somewhat specialized kinds of cells. For example, they have cells that serve as attaching to the rocks. All porifera, all sponges are aquatic. They live in the sea. They have no organs. There is no such thing as a head of a sponge or arm of a sponge or leg of a sponge or stomach of a sponge. But how do they actually feed and grow? Uh, they have pores and channels. So the seawater circulates through these uh, pores and channels. And those nutrients that exist in the seawater, for example, partially digested remains of plankton, sort of microscopic seawater animals or plants, they get into the inside of the sponge, and there are some rather primitive digestive substances that are produced by cells of the sponge. So these and there is absorption. These nutrients are absorbed into the body of the sponge, allowing it to grow. But that's about it. You see, there are no tissues, there are no organs, and there is no movement. Now, next phylum is somewhat more complex in terms of organization. Cnidarians with silent C. Not say cnidarians or cnidarians, they're cnidarians. Uh, there are some Greek-based terms that have silent C at the beginning or silent P or at the beginning, like ptosis, uh, spelled Ptosis, means falling down, or apoptosis, a kind of cellular death. It's a kind of waning, not really disintegrating, but waning. Also, it has a silent P, spelled Apoptosis, but pronounced apoptosis without P. So, and there are words like cnidarian, pronounced without C. Uh, what is the hallmark? First of all, representatives of cnidarians. You see a classical jellyfish on the left, right? But please note, it's not a fish, right? It's a misnomer. It's a bad kind of name. Uh, but it kind of stuck. Jellyfish. Uh, it has a primitive but real nervous system. It has a network of cells that react to changes in the environment. Particularly, they react to touch. And probably some of you have experienced their reaction to touch, right? They produce venomous substances that sting. That's the nervous system. That's the first example of nervous tissue and nervous system in the animal world. Then another example, coral reefs. You see a picture of a coral to the right. Uh, Corals are interesting. They do not. They are kind of like intermediate between sponges and other phyla of animals. They do not move like sponges. They're sessile. They sit on the surface of the rock. All aquatic, live in the sea. Uh, they have beautiful pigments like These corals have red pigments, other corals have yellow, blue pigments, etc. So they're very colorful. And this is an evolutionary adaptation, actually. It attracts phyto and zooplankton, small microscopic aquatic animals, protists, some very small plants, which are absorbed by the coral. And the interesting feature of corals is that they secrete something that remains on their surface and solidifies. So we say external skeleton. We will see other examples of exoskeleton uh, in just a moment. Now, echinoderms, a much more complicated phylum. Sea star on the left, sea urchin on the right. Sea star has exoskeleton, so in this regard it is similar to corals, and it evolved a unique seawater vascular system. Uh, the body of a sea star is full of canals, or channels, uh, in a way like in a sponge, but the special contractile cells in the body of the sea star, they make this seawater move. They propel the seawater, making it circulate inside the body of the sea star. And as the seawater circulates, nutrients are extracted directly from the circulating seawater. Interesting adaptation. Then yet another phylum, again much more complicated, mollusks. Mollusks are a large phylum. They include several orders and classes, etc. We will not go into depth of that. It's not a zoology course really, but the thing about there are two things that you need to know about mollusks. First of all, they have the so-called visceral mass, which is actually a mixture of internal organs. If we dissect this visceral mass, we will see primitive analogs of esophagus, stomach, intestine. Right? We will see something resembling liver, something resembling spleen, and also, mollusks have circulatory systems, which is just like echinoderms, like sea star, but more complicated circulatory system. Liquids circulate inside the body of a mollusk. Now, these liquids that mollusks circulate, they're not exactly seawater. There is a term for the liquid that circulates in a mollusk. It is called hemolymph. So it kind of begins to remind of blood, but it's not exactly blood. It doesn't have blood cells like blood of birds or mammals. But it is not just seawater. It is seawater plus some products that are made by the mollusk, circulating and helping the tissues to breathe and to absorb and digest food. And important about mollusks also, it's bilateral symmetry. Like we already mentioned that, see, this is octopus and its overall body shape is kind of eerie. It has a head and tentacles, and some octopuses have gigantic tentacles. But if you look at the head of the octopus, it has two eyes. One staring at you, it's the right eye, and one staring to the opposite side, it's the left eye. If you draw a line between these two eyes and continue to the end of the head and also to the nearest tentacle and to the end of the nearest tentacle, you will kind of split the mollusk into two parts, one right part and one left part. That's the bilateral symmetry. Bi stands for two. Lateral means side. So two sides, right side and left side. Uh, Compared to radial symmetry, this helped evolve, especially the nervous system, because in animals with bilateral system symmetry, you have not only left and right, you have also front and back, right? There is no such thing as front of a sea star, back of the sea star, and front of a sponge, back of the sponge. But again, if you draw this line between the eyes of the octopus and continue it all the way to the end of the nearest tentacle, you will have the front, right, which is in front of the eyes, closer to you than the eyes. And the back will be the rear end of the tentacle, right? So front and back. And the nervous system evolved in such a way that its most developed parts are in the front, close to the eyes, close to other sensory organs. So little by little, a brain evolved. Brain does not exist in primitive invertebrates like sponges, like cnidarians, or echinoderms, but something resembling the brain begins to evolve in mollusks, and bilateral symmetry helped this. I just wanted to add that mollusks are very diverse, and their nervous system is extremely well organized. They react not just to touch, they react to noise, they react to vibration, they react to temperature, etc., etc., etc. And they behave in an interesting patterns. Marine biologists love to study octopus, especially octopuses, squid to smaller, to less extent, but octopus, octopi, plural octopi, they are very, they are called by some marine biologists intelligent creatures because they have very complicated reactions to any change of the environment. You might have heard the name John Steinbeck, right? A Nobel Prize winner, American classic writer, Grapes of Wrath, or East of Eden, etc. He started his career as a marine biologist, actually, and he studied mollusks, and he loved to study octopus. In his comical short novels, Sweet Thursday, Canary Row, there is a character called Doc, and his life is basically study of octopuses. He writes books about octopuses. They are complicated organisms. And squid is maybe not as complicated, but squid served a huge role in the development of animal physiology, especially because giant squid can grow to huge size, and it has nerve cells, neurons, that are as large as the squid itself, as long as the squid itself. So they were easy target for experiments of animal physiologists. Uh, Now, the phyla of worms, actually, it's not a phyla, there are three phyla. And inside the group of animals, invertebrates that we call worms, there are three phyla. There are flatworms, cestoda, Latin name. There are roundworms, nematoda, Latin name, and there are segmented worms, like Annelida. Uh, the, they evolved different features. First, the flatworms they look like very primitive organisms, right? Like flatworm. What's complicated about flatworm? But they have evolved gastrovascular cavity. It's a cavity within the body. It is highly branched. See the picture to the left, gastrovascular cavity of a flatworm. And why it's called gastrovascular? Because so gaster is a stomach in Latin and in Greek, gaster. It is an element of the digestive system. So in the gastrovascular cavity, there are digestive enzymes that digest food. Plus, it is also used for circulation. Right? The walls of the canals of the gastrovascular cavity can contract and move fluids, distributing nutrients, helping nutrients to be absorbed into body of the flatworm, and to also help breathing, help delivering oxygen to the body of the flatworm. So it's a combination of a digestive system and circulation system, gastrovascular. Then roundworms, nematodes. They have long and round body, and it's pictured in the middle a little bit to the bottom. Their specialty is digestive tract, right? So while in flatworms there is just a gastrovascular cavity, in flatworms there is a gastrointestinal or digestive tract. It begins with the mouth, right? So due to bilateral symmetry, a roundworm has right side, left side, front, and back. And in the front of the roundworm, there is a mouth. There is an opening that can suck food in. Then it continues as a kind of intestine or digestive canal, long tube. This tube, at one point, rather close to the mouth, it forms a widening, which is kind of like a primitive stomach. Then it continues all the way in parallel to the body of the flatworm, and it ends as an anus, right? So there's front mouth and there's back anus, and undigested food, waste is expelled from the body of the roundworm through the anus. So it's a complete digestive tract. Then the picture to the right, segmented worms. They have a complete digestive tract like roundworms and a closed circulatory system. Flatworms have this gastrovascular cavity, so their vascular or circulating system is just canals with contractile walls. In roundworms, there is emerging vascular system. In parallel with their digestive tube, they also have something like a blood vessel. And again, it has widenings that are sort of like roundworms' hearts. Usually there are several hearts, like 5, 6, 7 hearts. That's the part of the blood vessel which has muscle cells in the walls, and these muscle cells contract, making the liquid inside this blood vessel propel. And then the blood vessel continues, branches into smaller and smaller and smaller blood vessels. Then these smaller blood vessels collect into, again, a tube, and this tube merges with the original blood vessel. So it's a closed circulatory system. The blood circulates in it, kind of like the electric current circulates in the closed electric system when you plug in your electric device, a light bulb or something. You form a closed system. So similarly, there is this closed circulatory system in segmented in segmented worms. Then the next slide that I want to show you, parasitic worms. Uh, since some of you will be healthcare specialists, you need to have some idea about parasitic worms or helminths. Several examples are shown here. Left upper corner, Ascaris. It's a roundworm or nematode. Uh, it, it causes a very nasty disease called ascaridosis or ascariasis. It is very extremely rare in the United States, but it is very prevalent in tropical, in equatorial areas where it's hot and humid. The eggs of the ascaris are thriving at high temperatures and high humidity. Uh, Infects mostly children. Infection occurs through fecal-oral route. It means when uh, uh, feces of a diseased animal uh, are digested, are eaten, swallowed with food or with drinking water, and these cysts form adult worms in the gastrointestinal tract. Um, Children especially are affected, and children with ascaridosis do not grow very well, and they tend to have swollen abdomen and abdominal discomfort, pain, etc. So many of them eventually die of lack of growth, lack of real nutrition. The nutrients go to the worm rather than to the body of the child. Then second from the left in the upper row, you see trichinella. Trichinella is also a roundworm, and you see in the picture it is shown where does it live, where does it locate in the muscle. The surrounding tissue is muscle, meat actually, and the typical host, other than human, host of trichinella are pigs, swine. And so undercooked pork is a tremendously dangerous source of trichinella, and if people do not cook pork according to existing regulations, then they can get this the trichinellosis, and it may be lethal because some species of trichinella also, when they accumulate in a certain number, they can infest the brain, and the cysts, the kind of children of these roundworms can migrate to the brain and cause lethal encephalitis. The picture below to the left shows pinworms. These are very small roundworms which live in the lower gastrointestinal tract, in the rectum. Then they infect mostly children, small children from 1 to say, 6 years of age, and the major symptom of this pinworm disease is when these little round worms crawl. They're highly motile. They move. They crawl from the rectum to the anus and to the tissue surrounding the anus, causing itching. And this poor child can itch terribly, and it is really a source of suffering for the child and concern for the parents. So the symptom of itching near the anus, it's a call for parents, guardians to bring this child to the doctor like immediately, and this child has to be treated for pinworms. Second from the left, bottom row, heartworm. Heartworm is uh, a worm, flatworm, which affects the large arteries uh, uh, stemming from the heart of canines, dogs, the pulmonary artery and aorta. And uh, when heartworm grows, the circulation is impaired. The heart cannot propel blood properly, and the dog suffers of hypoxia, lack of oxygen to tissues because of insufficient circulation of the blood. So if you have dogs, please vaccinate them against heartworm. Heartworm is extremely prevalent infection of unvaccinated dogs. And then to the right, in the upper right corner, there is a picture of tapeworms, or cestodes. Uh, Tapeworms like Taenia soli, it's probably the most important pathogen for humans. They, just like Trichinella, they infect mostly uh, swine, pigs, and they uh, develop in the tissues of the pig, in the meat of the pig, in muscles, and also their eggs are dropped by the ill or infected pig with feces. So humans can be infected both by ingesting eggs or by eating uncooked or undercooked pork. And what they get is the uh, taniosis. It's an inflammatory disease of the gastrointestinal tract, and as you see on this in this picture, of the lungs, with possible involvement of the brain. So tapeworms are dangerous, and if a person has symptoms of abdominal discomfort and a history of uh, living somewhere uh, where the hygienic standards, the sanitation is not as highly developed as in the United States, that person should be examined for tapeworms. Okay, next phylum, the biggest, the last phylum in the world of invertebrates, arthropods. Arthro, you heard the term arthrosis, right? It's the disease of articulations, joints. And pod, uh, pes or podes in Greek means feet, foot or feet. So animals with articulations on their feet, and actually they have articulations or kind of joints all over their body. Their bodies are segmented. You see, here's a to the left. There's a picture of a lobster, typical arthropod. It has the head, the thorax, the abdomen, the appendages, swimming appendages, then walking legs, mouth parts. All of them are segmented. All of them have parts which are joined together by something like articulation. Uh, the humans, by the way, preserve this feature. We not only have articulations in our upper and lower limbs, we also have segments, for example, in the muscular system of the abdomen, right? Those of you who have nice abs, those of you who exercise, you can see, or other people can see your segments of the abs. That's something that we inherited from arthropods. And one interesting thing about arthropods is that they are the biggest phylum. They are the most successful phylum, actually, on Earth uh, in terms of evolution, in terms of diversification, producing different species. There exist more than 1 million species of arthropods. No other phylum has so many species. Vertebrates have less species than arthropods. Now there is a subdivision in arthropods. This picture shows you examples of crustaceans. Crustaceans are aquatic. Arthropods, like crawfish, lobster, crab, etc. They all live in the water. They have these pincers in front of their body, in front of the uh, head, which serve for defense mostly. And then they have the antennae, antennas, which are for long kind of whiskers that move. They're sensory organs. They're sensory receptors. Crustaceans use these antennae for sensing uh, changes in temperature, changes in salinity of water, and approaching prey like small fish or plankton. Then there are other subdivisions in the phylum Arthropods. Uh, insects. Insects are arthropods too. Their bodies are segmented. Right? Now, how many legs do insects have? Question for you. Right? Six, right? Six legs. Uh, Flies, locusts, grasshoppers, etc. They're all insects. Uh, then there are arachnoids, spiders. What's the main? How do you tell a spider from an insect? Insects have six legs, right? And spiders have how many? This picture shows you right upper right corner, eight legs, right? Plus sensory antennas in front of the head. And also centipedes and uh, millipedes. Those are interesting group of animals. They resemble segmented worms, right? Annelids. But just like all arthropods, like crustaceans, like insects, like arachnoids, these centipedes and millipedes have hard exoskeleton. Uh, in all arthropods, this exoskeleton is made of uh, rock-hard substances. It can be thick, like in crabs, for example. There's this huge, or in lobsters, there's this very sturdy uh, exoskeleton, which is difficult to crack. Or it can be gentle, like in grasshoppers or in centipedes, but it is made of these rock-hard substances, and the special cells of the arthropod secrete it and make it solidify. To summarize, so animals are a kingdom. And small domain is larger, phylum is smaller. Kingdom is several phyla within a domain. All animals are consumers, depend on other animals for food, or other creatures for food. Plants also can be used as food. And they evolved special tissues and a certain kind of symmetry, radial or bilateral. Almost all animals can move around, and we just covered the invertebrate animals, which are classified into several phyla. Please be able to name these phyla as your slides show. You don't have to remember all names of the phyla that your book lists, but at least know the phyla that your slides and this video shows. Okay, thank you. That's the end of our lecture 7. See you soon in lecture 8.